And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Toronto Till I Die. This is the podcast for TFC fans talking all things highs and lows about our beloved Toronto Football Club. On this episode, we're going to recap the TFC end of season press conference, what was said, where do they go from here. We look at the player salaries that were just released. And obviously engage in the annual griping about who makes too much. We go to round two of our player grades, both in the midfield and with our forwards. And in added time, we'll quickly talk about the first round of the CPL and MLS playoffs and ask, is it okay to compliment your rivals when they're in the playoffs and you are not? Let's get into it. My co-hosts, Jeffrey P. Nesker and Michael Singh. Gentlemen, how were your weekends? Mine was battling a cold. I hope yours was much better than mine.
I hope you're feeling better, Mike.
Yeah,
a lot of MLS Cup
easy,
playoffs. Yeah, a lot of playoff watching for me. In addition, like a lot of soccer. Like yesterday was a full-on couch day for any soccer fan. You had, my Manchester United, Newcastle in the morning, and then El Clasico, and then Man City, Liverpool. Like that was just a write-off. And then obviously playoffs as well, and some CAMPL action too. So just a busy weekend of soccer, but what's new, man?
You can't say it, can you? You can't say Sunday also included another big game in the Prem, can you?
Don't consider it a big game.
Top of the table. That was my weekend. Sunday was a nice little cherry on top, with the Gunners a solid 4 points ahead of Man City at the top of the Prem League table. Long may it rain. Go Gadget Gooners. And a lot of soccer. I did read some of your recaps on the MLS Mothership yesterday, Mike. Nicely done, man. Some good turns of prose there. Great turns of phrase. I'll use the proper axiom and. It was awesome. I did miss most of the Montreal tie though, because by that point my wife was home and she
didn't miss anything.
On no more soccer. Saw the Kone goal. That was pretty nice. That's pretty sweet.
Well, okay, so save that for the end because we'll talk a little bit about complimenting those rivals. I spent the weekend battling a cold. I did get to watch both CPL playoff games, both of which were great matches in different ways. Which was fun. And then yesterday I felt well enough to be able to help my wife out with her volunteering at her fundraising event. So I spent the whole day walking around and pseudo running an event. So that was fun. So I missed most of the football yesterday. Let's get into it because nobody wants to listen to me banter on about how I was volunteering at a fundraising event. Before we get into the season-ending press conference, we got to say a goodbye and a proper send-off for a few players last week that were announced that will not be returning to Toronto FC for sure. The two biggest names, obviously, are the two that most TFC fans expected not to be back, which was Alex Bono and Quentin Westberg. The club basically just saying thanks, but we're moving on. And of course, other players that were mentioned, Noble Okello will not be getting a new contract with Toronto FC. Danielle Henry, maybe somewhat.
I'm a bit surprised. I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, in some ways it might be surprising for some, in others not so much. And then I don't think anybody was surprised by Inafune Achiachara not getting a new deal. But quickly, guys, just thoughts on those guys getting released or not having their contracts picked up for the 2023 season.
Quentin Westberg, Alex Bono, what I can tell you guys is that decision was made a very long time ago, early on this year. That was at least the premise that TFC
was it communicated to them at the time?
No, you're never going to do that, right? Because maybe there is a chance that, maybe Alex Bono figured it out. There's times this year he was looking like maybe he did. but just with the amounts that both of those guys were making, and just they haven't been up to par for the better part of 2 seasons now. I think
Fair.
it was bound to happen. I am a tiny bit surprised about Noble Okello, and the reason being for that is because while he obviously struggled this year, a lot of that was due to he was managing an injury that I'm not sure was his fault. Like, obviously injuries are never really anyone's fault, but his case in particular, it seemed like he just ran into bad luck after a couple of bad breaks. When he was on the field, he wasn't that good. But Noble is a guy that I think you're going to get the best out of when he's 26, 27, 28 years old, because he has the frame and he's mobile to really develop into a solid piece in the midfield. And, if it was obviously made that the decision was made that he wasn't going to be part of TSC's future, and hey, that's fine. Sometimes that happens for some young kids, but I do believe that he will go on and have a solid career, whether that be an MLS or elsewhere. As you mentioned, Mike Achara, not really a big surprise. He hasn't looked like the same player since going down with an injury. He lost his pace, and he just wasn't able to fully gain Bob Bradley's trust this year, which, I mean, you could see why, because when he was on the field, there are times where, okay, maybe this is the type of player he can develop into, but there wasn't just enough sample size to sort of go off. So, yeah, and all in all, just no real big surprises. Daniil, I think, same case. He just didn't live up to expectations this year.
Yeah. I mean, listen, you saying that the decision had been made on the 2 goalkeepers earlier in the season. There's a reason that I asked you that question, that I interrupted to ask that question, because, as much as you try to insulate those 2 players from the chopping block, you've got to think that that knowledge permeates through the organization and filters down to them in some way. Fair or not, I wonder. It makes me wonder just how much their desire to perform above and beyond was affected by the fact that they sort of knew that time had run out for them. The Okello and Achara moves, listen, they both hurt. I mean, Achara's headband game is elite. And, I've been high on Noble Okello for as long as we've identified him as a prospect, but it mirrors, the Prezio move and the Schaffelberg move, which is that TFC is not willing to bank on potential anymore. We've got a win now mode. Bill Manning has been pretty vocal about the 5-year plan. Noble Okello coming into form as Insigne and Bernardeschi are coming out of form doesn't really help this team. So in a way, I'm pleased. I'm pleased to see the team kind of sticking to their guns with respect to the moves that they want to make at the expense of some fan favorites. Okello was certainly mine, because I've said it a million times on this show, that kind of frame, that's a unicorn frame for a midfielder with soft feet. That doesn't come along often, and I really wanted him to figure it out. It looks like the fates have misaligned, and he's not going to get the chance to figure it out at TFC, but it cannot be said that he wasn't given his opportunities, and I think that that's something that we have to remember as we mourn the passing of these prospects, and maybe have them come back to hurt us with respect to where they land next. Daniil in particular, because he's still under contract with MLS, so he can go on waivers and another team can pick him up on the cheap. Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, the only other words I would give on Daniil is I'm disappointed. I'm sure he's disappointed personally and professionally, but so am I, because this is another Mac situation. Hometown boy coming home, make good. Obviously, it didn't work out in terms of minutes for him this season, and in terms of boding well for his World Cup ticket. But I would have, having a little bit of chaos on the team in your center back corps is never a bad thing, and he is the king of chaos. So that one's a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Maybe and maybe not. And it just sort of rolls into sort of the first point here, just in regards to the end of season press conferences and talking a bit about some of Bill Manning's comments about how they're going to rebuild this team, or continue to build this team, I should say, going into 2023. And you look at those players, and I know they're in terms of Okello, Henry, Achar, they're not necessarily starters or not, or sort of on the fringes of the 18, but it's noticeable that there are essentially players that would play in your spine, right? Like right up the middle, goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and attackers. And that's one of the things that Bob Bradley mentioned in his comments about, the fact that spine was not as great as it could have been last year, did not perform that we had hoped. And Bill Manning talking about kind of using the 2015 season template going into 2016 template to rebuild the team, looking for those players to rebuild. What are your thoughts on sort of those comments there, especially from Bill, in terms of the template, and do you think that's the right way for the club to go?
Mike?
In terms of 2015, I do believe it is the right way for the club to go, but I also believe that I think it's closer to 2014 than it is to 2015.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, what was the roster turnover? I don't remember it being so unbelievably shocking in the offseason between 2014 and 2015. Or when Bill is talking, is he talking about 2015 and 2016?
2015 and 2016.
Yeah, into the first MLS Cup.
Because he mentioned Drew Moore and Clint Irwin and Beta Shore.
Yeah, for sure. So
but was there any other additions beyond that, other than?
There were quite a few additions that year. That was a pretty
but I mean, we're off the back of an absolute fire sale. I mean, we lost more players. We lost 20 players, right? Like, so yeah, I think the numbers don't quite mush with me, but I think the attitude is maybe what he's talking about in terms of the vibes of how they're going to approach this rebuild. Go ahead, Mike. I see you're confused.
Yeah, I don't think it's the vibe. I think it's actually like roster wise, because essentially what he said is in 2015 going into 2016 when they made that jump is they added guys like Beta Shore, Drew Moore, and some veterans, MLS veterans had MLS experience, and those guys were the missing pieces to put the core over the top. The reason why I say it's closer to 2014 is because I think there's more to be done this year, like there was in 2014. Now, 2014 was a bit more dramatic. That offseason heading into 2015, obviously you had the Jermaine Defoe saga that was going on, which eventually turned into Seba and Josie. Now, we're not going to get pieces like that are going to be coming in, but I do believe that there are going to have to be significant pieces that come in, and guys who aren't just MLS veterans, although they will need those as well. So while 2015 to 2016 was a great time, and making that jump was obviously fantastic for Toronto FC, and I'm sure they'd love to do that, I think there's a little bit more work done that needs to get done before we liken it to the 2015 offseason.
And I wonder, when reading those comments, I start thinking about this sort of debate that's been back and forth with TFC fans in terms of, hey, do we go out and we get MLS veterans to try to fill out that core, or do we go out and look in Europe and try to bring those players in? I know we've talked about it on this podcast, but I find it an interesting conversation because in a lot of ways it speaks to how MLS in general, how teams are right now building their rosters. There's kind of different schools of thought in terms of how to build a roster. Toronto FC's way has been, we will spend to the max, right, in order to find success. But I wonder if there's going to be a little bit of reflection in the offseason about, hey, maybe in some of these key positions, we need to think about MLS vets to come and fill in that backbone, whatever you want to call it, of the team, but still find, highlight with some really great pieces in that third DP spot, maybe in goal. I wonder where based on those comments, I wonder where we think TFC is going to go in that sort of which plan they're going to go with in terms of the mold. Go ahead, JP.
You raised some interesting comments because I think it's pretty dangerous to use this language. One, using the 2015 offseason template rebuild ignores how much the league has grown since 2015. So there's no guarantee that approach is going to work in MLS 2022. In addition, Mike, who's very astute, very smart, comes in and says, no, it reminds him more of 2014. I'm not sure we want, I don't think using this language like, well, this will be just like the 2015 offseason, et cetera, does us any favors. It puts us back into that whiplash mode where expectation is planted that maybe the club can't deliver on. So I think we need to avoid that. I think we need to give more credence and spill more ink to the fact that this rebuild was long overdue, which the front office is never going to want to own up to because there's mud on their face. But I do think there are cleverer ways to structure it than these old chestnuts. And the other is, not really speaking in any respect to what a major overhaul it was when we finally pulled the trigger at the beginning of last season. So using these old tropes, I think, are very dangerous. The fan base is already on pins and needles, and now you're putting in an expectation that, we're going to compete. But I mean, to use 2015 means we're competing for MLS Cup next year. That's when you read between the lines, right? Rather, well, it will be just like 2016. Well, no one's going to say that because we lost in penalties, to the Seattle Sounders. But like,
we did make a cup final.
But we did make a cup final, so you can't.
And we should have won that.
We should.
I think we
Jeff,
were all there.
I'm
We
laughing.
absolutely should have won that.
I'm laughing because you're bang on. Because so many times during the past year, 2 years, and even in his end of season press conference, Michael Bradley touched on this, is we have to stop referring to the past. The past is
so dangerous.
So long ago. And then Bill Manning, first thing he does when he hits the podium, oh, guys, I kind of see this season kind of like 2050. You know what I mean? Like you're playing a little bit of both sides there when making those comments. But I definitely hear what you're saying.
I hear what you're saying. I will counter that there does need to be some strategy around how we go about these signings, right? And it's not to say that you have to exactly go down the exact same route that you did that time. But I think I'll disagree. You're talking about it from a player sense, Mike. I actually agree with Jeff. I think it's more the vibe. The idea that we need to find players that are going to mesh into a culture and provide us, senior level quality minutes on the pitch.
Well, then say that, front office. Don't tie it to 2015. Say that. I mean, my second question, Mike, because I got into that and I had another point, was, we've talked about the difference between, say, an international player and an MLS veteran in specifics, at least over the last 2 weeks. Do we think that MLS is the same league where a Drew Moore and a Stephen Beitashour and MLS lifers can come in and shoulder up the spine to the same degree that they did for us coming into 2016? I'm not so sure anymore. I'm honestly not so sure anymore that they're as much of a slam dunk as, because it's rose-colored glasses, right?
I don't think is there. I think you can. Yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. I mean, you got to scout really well. You have to scout really well.
Right.
Like but it's the same thing whether you're signing, an Italian center back or you're signing a former first round super draft pick that has been a solid MLS center back, right? Like you have to scout.
I think they're diametrically opposite, but that's
well, maybe yes, maybe in terms of certain qualities for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I think we need to stop worrying about whether or not we're going to be signing players from Europe and saying automatically they're. I think that's dangerous language. Is going like we're going to sign a player from Europe and therefore they're automatically better. We've seen it before.
I think anything binary.
Europe.
Yeah.
True. But I don't think, you can't say like, oh, we got to go out and sign, and the majority of the players that we need to sign are from Europe. One, I don't necessarily think that guarantees you any level of success in this league.
100%,
in fact, what we've seen in this league is that there are teams that go out and don't necessarily go out in the European market and sign players or find players either domestically. And when I say domestically with MLS now, I would say Central America as well and a bit of South America as well, because MLS are firmly in those markets now in terms of being able to sign those players. So to say that you can't find that quality either within the league or within our region to make yourself a better and potentially a cup contender, I don't buy that narrative per se.
So I think it's a combination of both, right? And here's the one flag that I keeps raising in the back of my head. Can Bernardeschi and Lorenzo Insigne adapt and play their style and get the best out of those players with MLS level players? Or does this team need to move the bar and move the needle a little bit and bring in more guys that are like Crescito? I think one thing that's abundantly clear after this season, that's where I'll disagree with you, Mike, is I think it's so clear the gap between Serie A and Major League Soccer. Because when you can bring in a guy like Mimo, who had a really good career, but was never considered a star in any regard or
the
any
guy. Yeah,
capacity.
Berna too.
And he comes in at 35 years old and he looks, in my opinion, like the best left back in Major League Soccer. I think that tells us there's a clear gap there. Now, is it possible for the TFC to go out and fill their entire team with Serie A
I'm not
Italian
saying
players?
entire teams, yeah.
No. Well, even make a number of acquisitions that are former Serie A or no, you can't do that. That's just it's impossible for a team to do that.
It's untenable.
And that's why
100%.
I say I think you need a combination of both. I think when you look at TFC's third designated player, I wouldn't be surprised if it's another Italian player because they know that type of play. They know the type of player now. Obviously, players are different, but at least you'll have some familiarity with Bernardeschi and Insigne, who are obviously the core building pieces of this team. And then I also agree with you, Mike. I think the rest of the roster, you have to. That's the way MLS works. You have to go out and get MLS veteran players to fill out your roster. TFC this year had maybe, 14 players who had actual playing experience, and then even less if you consider the amount of players who were actually in MLS and had playing experience. Bob Bradley, Bill Manning both talked about it in their pressers, is what goes on in Major League Soccer sort of caught up with Insigne and Bernardeschi, especially after coming off, and Crescito as well, coming off long seasons. And I'm talking about the travel, maybe the style of play, maybe the conditions of the play, the fields they play on. So you need guys who know about that stuff. And we saw a difference, like a guy like Shane O'Neill. Well, towards the end of the year, he didn't have a great finish to the year. Throughout the season, he was so important. And we could see just the level that he has, especially experience-wise, in comparison to some of the other players that were on the pitch. So you need more guys like that who just, what you're going to get. And when you inevitably have injuries, you can plug and play those guys and they can help get you across the line in some of these games in June, July, August. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, to me, the most, as much as the third DP and maybe finding a goalkeeper are probably going to be one of two or maybe of the three biggest things you need to do in this offseason in terms of player acquisition, I think it's just as important to find those guys who can fill out the bones of your team. And a lot of those guys will have to be maybe MLS or MLS type players in this league, because in a lot of ways, those type of players know how to win ugly games that aren't going to be pretty, and you're not going to have a Bernardeschi rocket to win you a game, right? Or they can keep you in games where you're not great on the day and allow Insigne and Bernardeschi and maybe your third DP or Crescito, if he comes back, to wield a bit of magic that can win you a game. And that's what I mean, right? Is we need to be better at finding those players that can help us in those kind of moments, because that to me is the difference between a team that has 2-3 really great players and finishes 12th compared to having 2 really 3 great players, but then have the backup behind them to keep them in matches that then get you into a playoff spot. And then you never know where you go from there.
And that's just the process too, right? Of building out a roster. I think that's what we also have to remind ourselves. And as Jeff pointed out, this was such a massive teardown and rebuild. You're not going to be able to accomplish all of that in one season, especially with some things that were lingering already, like Josie Altidore's contract, his buyout situation,
Bono's
the amount of money
contract.
TFC were, perhaps paying for guys like Kamar Lawrence to get off their books and art, like, you know what I mean? There was still lingering stuff that didn't allow them to do everything they wanted to do. You had Bones and Q, who were making up over $1 million combined still on the roster. You had Chris Mavinga, who was making over $1 million still on the roster. TFC didn't have the flexibility they wanted to do the full proper rebuild, and that'll come. This in a better way this offseason. I don't think it's still 100% in the clear, but they have a lot more wiggle room than they did certainly this past season.
They can take some more risks. Whether they pay off once we start kicking a ball in anger is anybody's guess. That's the real success or failure. But they can certainly be more aggressive in the transfer market. I can't bring them up, but we've got a few questions here. Axis is talking about Borjan. He just re-signed for multiple years with Red Star Belgrade, did he not?
He did.
He's off the table. Yeah.
I don't know if he's necessarily off the table because they could still.
TFC does not like paying transfer fees. Yeah.
True.
If they wanted him, they would have swooped in before he re-signed and been aggressive. They don't like paying transfer fees. This team is not about that. Richard's asking, will TFC lose another player in the upcoming expansion draft? Maybe, but obviously we're listen, this is a very small roster we have to protect at this point. There's going to be a lot of outgoing players. Whether we get 50K of Garber bucks for them or whether they're released unceremoniously, if they want Jordan Peruzza, my favorite Italian midfielder, they can have. Okay, fine, but okay, so that even makes it less cool.
We'll get
between
into the
players that will
closer
protect and the players that are uneligible. There's not a lot of attractive options for them to take away.
We're not too worried about it.
30-something teams in the league. They're not getting Insigne for 50,000.
Well, they'll probably. I would be smart enough to leave them unprotected because who's going to actually go after them?
That's another discussion. No. Yeah, there's no way they're doing that. Giovinco, listen, man. He hasn't played competitive football in almost 2 seasons, and that move to Sampdoria did not work out very well. If we're going to put Bill Manning's feet to the coals for bringing up the 2015 offseason, I don't think we're allowed to talk about Giovinco coming back to TFC for a while, if ever, at this point. Maybe as a coach, certainly as an ambassador, but I think that ship has sailed. And I honestly think that everybody calling for Giovinco to come back will be so upset if he did, because he's just not the same player he was anymore. I think we need to put that to bed. He's not saving this team, despite talking about the 2015 offseason rebuild template. It's the word in everybody's mouth at the end of season pressers. I think it behooves us to avoid discussing Giovinco. It's not happening. And then I think that was it. Oh, what's the decision on Oro? I mean, we talked about it last week. Man didn't show up to training. He's got a beautiful CN Tower tattoo on his neck. Loves the city. There's a lot of people that love the city that don't play for Toronto FC. I think his time at this club is over, and that's of his own onus. If you're a professional football player, half of your paycheck comes from being professional about playing football, and if you're going to half-ass it, especially on a Bob Bradley side, you're gone. I don't think I know anything about whether Santos is making the loan permanent or have inquired about making the loan permanent. But I think we'll never see him again in a TFC shirt, and that's fine. Thank you for the memories.
Yeah, if we want to get into the salary release stuff really quickly here, one of the things I'll just point out is that Oro is still on the list, obviously, as he was on loan. And it's reported at 428,000 that he's on.
Great value, in my opinion.
Sure, I guess I just wonder again. If he's not showing up to training, is that value? I don't know, right?
Yeah, it's an albatross contract. We've got to move him on. Will Schaffelberg be back? I would say absolutely not. Nashville's got the option to make his loan permanent,
and I'm pretty sure Bill Manning I think Bill Manning.
They alluded to as much without saying absolutely. They said we expect him to be a Nashville SC player. Good on Schaffelgod. He took his opportunity and he ran with it, and he made himself a Nashville. He made Nashville want to buy him on the permanent, and we wish him the best of luck, but I don't think he's back at TFC, so that ship has sailed also.
No, I don't think so. I agree with you. And just going through these Bears salary numbers that have just been released.
Let's get into numbers.
For TFC. I mean, I actually didn't find a lot of surprises here.
Me neither.
Most of these are pretty much what I sort of expected. them to be. Obviously, with the new players coming in July, we now have an idea of what they are being paid. We could see Crescito's on a song of a deal at 1.5, which I think is great. Bernadeschi
It's about
right
what,
now
$880,000 less than max TAM, the threshold.
Yeah, roughly.
It's right up there. Yeah.
Bernadeschi's again on the 6 that we thought. Obviously, people are going to sort of look and stare at Insigne at 14 mil. We kind of knew it was going to be around there anyway.
There's no surprises there.
Yeah, and in the end of the day, like, he's a DP, so it doesn't really count that much against the cap. I mean, it does, but not in a way that's going to hamstring you.
That's where I disagree with you, Mike.
Okay,
it will, and you'll see that in the third designated player.
Fair enough.
As I mentioned,
it's still coming out of someone's pocket. 100%.
So as I mentioned last week, like the amount that the team is spending on both Insigne and Bernadeschi, fans got to temper their expectations for the third designated player. It's not going to be a guy. I believe it'll be a household commodity here in Toronto. It'll be very much, when we talk about 3 DPs, he'll be the third designated player behind Insigne and Bernadeschi. Yeah. And hey, TFC might get creative in doing that. They might go after a young DP. They might go after a DP that's under the DP threshold in order to give themselves more flexibility in other roster spots. I think that's still to be determined, but what I can tell you is that it won't be an Insigne or Bernadeschi.
It won't be another $14 million man.
Yeah. Just a clarity question on the third cap, because of what they're paying Insigne and Bernadeschi. How much is that of that as a cap hit? I can't remember the amount.
It's like 1 point something million.
No, 625,000.
Oh,
something
okay.
Like
so
that,
yeah. So roughly. Their actual roster hit is minute, but obviously someone's paying that money. So convincing them to shell out another 14 million over and above the salary cap is not going to be easy, considering the performance of this team. It may be a better sell. I mean, Mike's not saying it outright, but we could be looking at a 1-year deal, sort of like what was his name? Paz's best friend.
Piatti?
Yeah, look at almost like a Piatti deal, a 1-year DP deal. See what happens for this season, or we get Gareth Bale on max TAM for a year, hopefully. that sort of thing. And I think that's what you mean when you're being creative. In terms of unlocking the young DP mechanism, considering we've cleared out our latest crop of academy prospects, I don't know how viable that kind of move is looking in terms of what it unlocks for us as we build our roster.
I don't think it has anything to
do it.
The academy products. I think it just means that TFC would be able to go out and get a couple of players that if they do pay a transfer fee, it doesn't count on their cap hit. So, and they'll still count as
MLS.
Yeah, it's a complex thing that we don't have to right to, but it gives them more flexibility roster-wise.
Regardless, I'll still stand by my point that looking for kids on this roster right now is maybe a dirty word. So I would say there were better times to flex that muscle in terms of unlocking the young roster mechanisms and stuff like that, knowing full well how complicated it is. Just knee jerk. That's my thought on there. And just finally, anybody that's going to say, I'm so surprised that we're paying Insigne 14 million a season. Were you following the extended courtship of Lorenzo Insigne? I mean, it should not be a surprise. Let the other MLS pundits and fans, drive themselves silly, making backflips about how much we're paying him. We can afford to pay him that money. And that's why we're laughing.
That's
why we got him.
Here's a better question. Okay, we see he makes 14 million. I think the next closest player in the league is Xherdan Shaqiri, who makes 8.2 million. Knowing Bernadeschi makes about 6.5 million, do you guys believe that it was the right decision now that we've seen Insigne for half a year to go out and pay
such a powder keg of a
$14 million for him to join this team?
Can I make that decision next year? I can't. It's hard for me to judge him on what ended up being 14 games.
And
Yeah,
he went through a lot personally.
And he
There's
went
that
through a
too.
lot of personal stuff.
That's
And
fair.
you know, this loops back to something I didn't say last weekend when we were talking about the advantage and disadvantage of bringing players in the July transfer window. You know, you end up with players that are gassed if they're playing domestically right up until they come to you, such as Insigne and Crescito. They've already played a full season of football. And if they're starters, they've played starting minutes for a full season of football, so they're gassed. I'm going to answer your question in the best way I can think of. If a player if we hadn't signed Insigne and a player like Insigne popped up this year, we would do it. So yes, it was the right decision. When a player of that quality is available and you can sign them and you have the fiscal and roster relief in order to do it, you do it every time. You know, will it light the league on fire in the way that we expected? I mean, you know, there are people that buy $400 million mansions and the plumbing's still broken, right? Like sometimes it's still a fixer upper, regardless of what scale on the tax bracket you fall into. You know, I don't want to spoil too much about the awards, the WTR awards that we'll review the winners next week, but there are some prizes with respect to Lorenzo Insigne's overall impact on TFC fandom, opposed to the Bernadeschi's and the Crescitos and the old stalwart Jonathan Osorios. You know, that's fair. If you're gonna make that kind of money in this league, you're gonna be under the microscope. So yeah, I'm with Mike with respect to on the field of play. I'm not willing to make that answer yet, but I will say 10 times out of 10 you make that move.
If I could maybe just interject one thing here, in terms of, is he worth $14 million, or would you pay him the $14 million knowing what we know now? Look, I think
that's not how contracts work.
No, but like in terms of the shot in the arm he gave the club when he got here,
100%.
and like, look, we always want to talk about on the pitch performance and success. Obviously, as fans, of course, we want that. That's the primary thing. But you can't ignore the shot in arm, the ticket sales, the marketing, the relevancy the club gained during that time. And to give him a full season of that, where he's fully rested, you know, he gets a full training camp with the team, where they really get to build those ideas that they want to do during the season. That will have a value to TFC. I know people don't want to talk about that, but that is an equation in that whole, how much do you pay a player of that quality to come to your club? So if you're sort of looking for a get off the fence and kind of make an answer based on half the season, I would say yes for now, based mainly on that. Plus, look on the trajectory in terms of on the field that he was contributing in terms of goals and assists, he would, if that continued throughout a full season, he'd be an MVP candidate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily disagree with you guys. I agree that it's probably too early, especially based off that sample size, knowing that the team was still rebuilding, knowing what he went through personally, to make a full assessment on whether or not he's worth that transfer. However, I do believe there is a little voice in the back of the front office somewhere that is questioning, was he the right player to go all in on?
Sure.
I'm not saying that I know that for a fact, but I just believe that there is somewhere questioning that.
I absolutely think so. I mean, you know, the expectation when you spend that big is to set the world on fire, and even more specified than that, the expectation is that he would bail us out on his mighty wings of whatever hole we put ourselves in the first half of the season. And because that didn't happen, you know, it's very easy to start allowing those voices in with respect to, you know, if this had been Erling Haaland or whatever the case may be, you know, would we be in the same position? It's an enormous cost outlay. You know, those El Magnifico banners that were up through the entire GTA from east to west, north to south, they didn't come cheap. So yeah, I guarantee you there are bean counters and performance analysts and people in the know in the orbit of that club that are going, you know, did we buy a lemon here? But I think the verdict's, it's not a safe verdict, right? There's too many variables.
No. Also, it also stings a little bit when you look at Hani Mukhtar, for example, who is going to win the MLS MVP award this year.
He didn't
You
hit
look
the
at what
ground running. Yeah.
but look at what he's making. He's gonna make 1.5 million, I think, this year. Like Sebastian Driussi, he's in the same boat with Austin, who had a fantastic game over the weekend. Another MVP frontrunner. He's making. I actually don't even know how much, but I can't imagine it's anything much. So when you see those numbers and you compare it to what Insigne was doing on the field, I wonder if there is, maybe if someone
That's
wrote
an
in the chat.
existential nightmare, right? Like that's talking about the very soul of this club. Like,
Yeah.
Tony here wrote in the chat, we should get 2 Bernadeskis over Insigne. Like, would you guys rather have 3 Bernadeskis? Would you rather have an Insigne, Bernadeski, and a third DP? Like that's like what's going through now. Obviously,
this is getting a little bonkers. So actually, let's just tie this into the grades, okay? Because Insigne is on the list to be graded this year. So let's go into that. So we'll do a little preamble, and then we'll get into
I mean, we pick this up next week because I'll give this a think, and I'll come in with guns blazing with notes because I have thoughts on this, and it's always. Hindsight is always 2020. That's the thing that I'll cap this off with. Hindsight is always 2020. Fandom will never be satisfied. The grass is always greener on the other side. When you're talking about the Hani Mukhtars and the Driussis, you're also talking about flash in the pans that may not be sustainable. Where this whole thing was about building a sustainable year after year title challenger on the back of multi-year deals. They're diametrically opposed to each other. Of course, we'd rather be Austin FC or Nashville right now. Of course we would. I mean, we're staring down the back of a long off season, saying goodbye to some more treasured mementos and fan favorites. But that's not necessarily fair.
That's also part of the argument is that I actually wouldn't rather be in Austin or Nashville right now.
Thank you.
That's also another thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the Insigne. That's something in his court. Like I'd rather be the club that goes and spends and gets big names. And, of course we didn't succeed this year, but you see a plan that they're working towards. And as a fan, like that's more fun to talk about and discuss than.
Yeah. I mean, how did Mike say it best on that sunny August Monday that we did it? He said, money doesn't buy happiness, but your club didn't buy you Bernadeschi and Insigne, right? Like, we're lucky enough to be having these conversations, right? And that's where all this hate on social media is coming from. Like, don't mistake it for analysis. It's proper hate. It's my club can't do what your club does, so I'm going to start picking apart at the seams. And we're an easy target right now. And we put ourselves in that position. But when you make big risks, you open yourself up to big criticism, and that's unfortunately where we're at right now.
Yeah, and the reason I want to go into the grades is because it speaks to my argument as to why you would rather be Toronto FC and why you'd rather have Insigne. Because if you look at our grading, and we're going to look at the midfield and the forwards now, is that if you look at what we had in terms of forwards and midfielders,
I love it. Yeah,
yeah, but but think about this, right? Okay, let's grade these as midfielders. We got Kay, Akello, Osorio, Bradley, and I put Insigne in the midfield. I know he plays as a forward, but I'm going to, just for this argument, I'm going to put it in the midfield. With forwards, Akinola, Achara, who's now gone, Peruzza, and Kerr, right? And Jimenez. Jimenez and Bernadeschi, sorry. But the players that he had to play around just weren't able to help lift him, right? He had to carry a lot of the play.
He made Jaden Nelson a lot better. I mean, Jaden Nelson really benefited from having Crescido and Insigne on that pitch with him.
Where I would say Insigne, where I'd say players like Driussi or Hani Mukhtar had a lot more around them in terms of just pieces that were able to compete right now. I think you got to reserve a little bit of judgment on Insigne until we see what these pieces shake out to be in 2023, right? And I think that's where we need to reserve that judgment. Would I like 2 Bernadeschis? Sure, but Insigne could turn out to be the second Bernadeschi in that way, right? We just got to see how it plays out in 2020.
There also wouldn't be Bernadeschi without Insigne. That's also
very true.
Point.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean he's the guy that started this whole recruitment thing. So count your lucky stars, right? Like all the dominoes started with Lorenzo Insigne, and I do, there I can't put the fibers together, which is why I want to revisit this next week. But would we have a better answer if he had come in January? And I don't think you can say no, right? The fact that he came in July, and the fact that
I
we're
agree.
still
You need a
talking
full
about
season.
bringing guys in July, to start this attack run over and over again. It's one of the things that I can't, if you want big ticket players and you want to flex that financial muscle, odds are you're getting them in July. And that's sort of been the lead, the chain around TFC's leg with respect to realizing our ambitions, is that it creates lost seasons, right? Or it creates half seasons or weirdo Franken seasons. And I would love to eliminate that variable. Is it fun waiting for your new toys to arrive in the July heat? It is, but when we start being critical, it just makes it's madness inducing. So yeah, let's table that. I want to get like a solid few questions for you guys down towards next week, because I think that's so interesting. I think you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You lose out on the player because it's MLS and our transfer windows are wonky, but maybe we should practice a bit more restraint, because these July arrivals are crazy sometimes, and
True.
you don't get the full answer to the question in a competitive league. Yeah,
and obviously some of the players that are going to be mentioned here. Thanks, Michael Singh, for picking up that I had not put Jaden Nelson in the midfield conversation.
Oh my God!
But some of these players are going to have incomplete or not really complete grades because they came in July. But I will still stay on the stance that if you find the right player and you have to wait till July, I'd rather the team do that than rush into somebody to get them into January and they're completely not the right fit. That's kind of how I see that. But we'll continue into these.
The Soteldo equilibrium. Yeah.
There you go. We'll continue our 2022 season review, issuing position player by player grades. Today we're going to look at the midfield and forwards as mentioned before. Next week we'll finish up with grades for Bob Bradley and Bill Manning. But we'll start with the midfield. No 3 words this time, guys. We'll just.
I have the best.
If you have 3 words, do it. Do it. I'm just saying you don't have to necessarily have them.
Okay. Well, no, of course I'm going to do it.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So then, JP, and I'll start with you in terms of the midfield. We'll start off with Mark Anthony K. What do you got?
3 words. Please stay healthy. Letter grade B-. I wish I could give him higher, and I think I probably gave him too high based on his performances on the field this season. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Mr. Singh.
For Mark Anthony K?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to give him a C.
I think that's fair.
Actually, I'll make it a C-.
Okay.
First, obviously, he wasn't able to stay healthy. He came to TFC with injury problems. And I think his injury actually really hurt the club because that midfield's obviously extremely thin. And when you lose a guy who's that important to your team, it hurts. And also, he was nowhere close to the player that he could be. Right? Mm-hmm. We've all watched Mark Anthony K play for years. And I believe that there is still a lot more that he can give and he can become. So based on his level of play, I think C- is where I'm going.
Okay. Yep. All right. Fair enough. I'm on the same. I'm C-, and that's mainly partly because of injuries. But even in the games that he did play in, I don't think he was at his best. And that's mainly, again, I think just down to fitness and being able to impact the game that way. So I'm sticking with a C- as well as I try to type here our grades going in. But we'll move on. I know he's now not going to be back with the club next year, but maybe just a quick letter grade for Noble Okello.
Well, I'm not going to do that because I've got my 3 words. So you're never going to not do my 3 words. Never really fit. I gave him a C, and it's a tough one for me. Like I said, I think of all the academy prospects, I was the highest on Noble Okello because he brings something different to the equation. And, if he could figure it out, but he just ran out of runway. I think that's fair to say. He ran out of runway. It's a position of need. It's a depth position of need, and you can't have any stragglers. And I think that's why he wasn't renewed.
I give him a D plus.
Mm-hmm.
When you're only playing 4 or 5 games this year, it's obviously tough to give him a fair evaluation. But what he did this year, and what's perhaps the most telling, is he didn't earn a new contract with Toronto FC.
Yep.
And I think that's really telling of sort of the overall season that he had, not only when he was on the pitch, but also, when he was training, everything. I don't think that he was, again, some of this is not his fault. He's beyond his control, but there just wasn't, he didn't show enough, all things considered, for TFC to renew his contract. And I think that to me is just the most telling. So I'm going to go with, what did I say? D plus? D plus.
You said a D plus, yeah.
Okay, mine's a D. Pretty much the same reason. So I don't think I need to go into elaborate too much more than that. When he was on the pitch, really didn't really stand out. And I think that's part of the
except for the mistakes. Yeah.
Positive
play didn't stand out. Negative play was pretty obvious. Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Jonathan Osorio. JPN, go ahead.
Please come back. A plus.
Yeah. I think a lot of TFC fans are feeling the same way. All right, Mr. Singh.
I'm an A minus. When he was on the pitch, he was absolutely fantastic. I think he probably played his best games in a TFC shirt when he was on the pitch. But he really hurt the team when he wasn't on the pitch. And once again, for the third, fourth straight season, Jonathan Osorio did not play that as many minutes as he could have. I don't think he eclipsed the 2,000 minute mark.
No,
and I
that's
think that's
fair.
the fourth straight season that has happened. So when you can't stay healthy,
that's an issue.
You think that affects his contract talks with TFC?
I think they'll try and use it as a bargaining chip. And I think it may affect scouting from Europe, but all of this evaporates if he has an amazing World Cup performance.
I do think it helps, or it helps TFC's case and hurts Ozo's case a little bit, because we know that this club has been burned in the past by giving out loyalty-based contracts. And one of those, of course, I'm referring to is Josie Altidore. And he turned 30 years old. TFC gave him a 3-4 year contract at a price that obviously we look back and say it was way too much. And TFC runs the same risk of doing that with Jonathan Osorio. Now, albeit there are stark contrasts between Osorio and Altidore, but age eventually catches up to everybody. And not only that, when you're not able to stay fit and stay healthy, and if you commit so many dollars towards a player, then it is a risk that you're taking. That being said, I think TFC probably take that risk and give Osorio a fair contract offer. And it'll be up to Osorio whether or not he wants to return.
Max TAM. Yeah.
All right. The one that I think will divide a lot of
what did you give Oso?
I gave Oso an A plus. But he was the best player. To me, he's player of the season for TFC. Yep. I know Bernardeschi did a lot of things down the stretch. I still think over the duration of the season, Jonathan Osorio was our best player.
Yeah, Axis keeps asking, when does Okello become the next Mark Anthony Kaye or Jason Russell Rowe? I don't know if he does, and that's sad. I don't know if he does. This is a outlier in terms of the physical stature and the soft feet ability, and it's a very difficult equation to put together and come good on. I don't know if he does, and that sucks for me to say, but the future's in his hands, not mine. So, best of luck to him. Hopefully he finds it out at a lower level or at a different club in MLS.
Okay, perfect. So let's go into the captain, Michael Bradley. I'll start this time. Mike, you can go ahead and start.
Michael Bradley. I'm giving him an A. Yeah, I could have given him an A plus, to be honest with you. At his age, his expectations, he had one of his better seasons, I think, in a Toronto FC shirt. From the advanced metrics, from his ability to stay healthy. The guy didn't miss a training session all year.
Mhm.
He played all but 10 minutes in Major League Soccer, and I thought that when he wasn't being left out to dry, aka playing alongside a bunch of young kids and inexperienced
Yep.
kids who, weren't natural midfielders, when he, we got very little glimpse of it, but when he played alongside MLS level midfielders, and he looked very, very good. I thought Michael Bradley was probably the most consistent player on Toronto FC this season, so I'll give him an A.
Okay.
Mhm.
Jeff?
Gave him a B plus. Most consistent player on TFC, I agree, but also consistently exposed in the same consistent ways as he's been exposed as Father Time affects his pace and affects his ability, his recovery speed and stuff like that. Um, you know, I wrote for the 3 words one more year. I think the argument of is he going to be a starter, is he going to be a bench guy, is just grinding metal at this point, right? Like Michael Bradley is going to play all the minutes he wants to play at this club until he retires from this club or football in general, moves into coaching or has a well deserved relaxation. Yeah, I mean, I see no reason to harp on him. He's Mr. Consistent, good and bad. You know what you're going to get with Bradders, and that doesn't excuse the fact that he can still surprise us. You know, that beautiful build-up play that resulted in that goal. I believe it was in the Charlotte game. I mean, he looked like 10 years younger and had played an entirely different position. That's what you get with Michael Bradley. You get consistent highs, consistent lows, and occasionally wonderful and occasionally absolutely woeful. If he thinks he's got the legs, I'm not in any position to tell him otherwise, and that's where I am with Michael Bradley.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree. B plus. I think he played this season the most minutes he's ever played as a professional, which
Sure.
is stunning at this age. And I agree. Like, I think he's a lot of people's, along with Alex Bono, favorite whipping boy in terms of criticism. But if you look at his underlying numbers and you just look at the performances, he was actually pretty good this year and not really deserving of a lot of the harsh sort of vitriol he gets. My thing is still, I don't think he necessarily needs to be a 90-minute player every week, but clearly he's going to be. So
yeah. I mean, that ship sailed. Yeah.
That's that.
I mean, until you have someone who can actually supplement him. Like this year, you had nobody who could play his role aside from Michael Bradley.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Agreed.
Agreed. Like if we grab Darlington Nagby, maybe he'll start riding the pine a little bit longer because then we have a proper 6 destroyer.
Yeah, and Bob said that the plan wasn't to have Michael play this many minutes. That's just the way it sort of worked out because of the roster and injuries and all these types of games TAC were playing in. And you have to give credit to the guy too. Like 35 years old, you're second in Major League Soccer in minutes played, and you do so at a level that I think may not be elite, but it's definitely steady and a good level in Major League Soccer. So for the fact he was
100%.
able to do that and not really look like the season was wearing on him, I think that speaks volumes to his ability to take care of himself and just his mentality overall.
Yep.
Fair enough. Okay.
100%.
We spent a lot of time talking about him, but let's give him a grade. Lorenzo Insigne. JPM.
Who wants to go first? I said stuck in third, and because it's only 3 words, I couldn't. You have to understand that I mean third gear. I gave him a B minus, and I think that might be too high based on the skills of the player. Based on forget it. Let's take away the expectation, the money spent, and just on the pitch, stuck in third gear. Didn't like body language at certain points. I didn't necessarily feel the same commitment to the team that we got from the other side of the pitch, our new number 10, which may be an unfair comparison, but so be it. B minus, and I do feel that might be a bit too high, but I'm reluctant to give, again, expectations. I'm reluctant to give the $14 million man a C for fear that I'll find a horse head under my pillow or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at a B minus, and cheers for the future.
Lorenzo, yeah, for me, it's a B. It's a B for me. I expected the body language to some capacity. I expected him to eventually grow in and be frustrated. In his end of season press conference, he told us he didn't watch any games in Major League Soccer until he signed his contract with Toronto FC in January. So I knew that this would be a little bit of an eye opener coming from Napoli, Serie A team that has been so competitive to Major League Soccer. And I also think when he started, and before having his personal issues, the goals that he was scoring was unbelievable. The quality of goals that he was scoring was top.
Goal assistance, like goal plays.
It was top, right? And then obviously when you go through that, I can't imagine what that does weighing on you. So I gotta give him a B. I'll give him a passing grade for this year, and I am excited about him getting a full preseason under his belt heading into 2023.
Absolutely.
It's a B for pretty much all the same reasons that you guys have here. I was tempted to give him an A, and I was using my rationale was that if I extrapolated what he was doing throughout an entire season, again, he would be in an MVP conversation along with Federico Bernardeschi, right? But it is what it is for that. I've said it on this podcast, like I thought he would not struggle, but he'd take some time to adapt here. Again, he's never really lived anywhere outside of Naples before, right? It's this whole move and the campaigns around him and all of that. That's a lot to take in. And then to come right in and expect, or at least have the fans hope that you can pull them into a playoff spot right away. That's a lot to take on. Doesn't matter how much you're paying them. So I think given that, a B is a fair result. And then, of course, we'll see what 2023 looks like for Lorenzo Insigne. And the last midfielder we'll give a mark to is Jaden Nelson. JPN, go ahead.
Onward and upward, B plus. He's my favorite of the kids, and he, second place is quite a ways behind. You look at the improvement from beginning of the season to the end of the season. You look at the chemistry he's developed with other senior members of the squad, including the superstar Italians. You look at the gumption. You look at the sort of course correction with respect to mistakes that were replete at the outset. And you look at his adaptability in playing as a midfielder when he's a natural winger. I mean, you're talking about a guy that has played himself into a position on this roster, which is a marked difference from, say, the Okellos and the Acharas of TFC land. I almost gave him an A, but I can't ignore the first 6 months where he was a bit of a disaster and a turnover magnet. So I think a B is fair. B plus is probably me. Recency bias, but I'm curious what you guys think.
A minus for me. I was waiting for a season like this from Jaden Nelson, where we all see the talent. It's there, the potential that he has, the pace that he has, obviously the skill. And I've been watching this kid play for years now, and I'm just waiting for him to have a season like this where you can actually say he made some serious strides. And this was this year. He made some serious strides. And I believe that he will likely be the first of Toronto FC's youngsters to go to a good league in Europe. And TFC will probably allow that to happen potentially this offseason.
Okay, you've convinced me, because originally I had C+. And I didn't mean it as a negative. I actually meant it as a positive, because I thought he hadn't grown so much, because like at the beginning of the year I probably would have put him at a D.
Oh yeah. Oh my
But
gosh.
I
I would
think
have put him
he'll
on a
grow so
bus
much that
home.
that it got to a C plus. But I think you convinced me that
Mm.
it could be a B. So I'm going to leave it at a B for his grade.
Cool.
I would say that yes, he has made strides, huge strides. I think near the end of the season, you really saw him put it together a lot better. And I actually think that it will serve him better to actually stay as a midfielder and not as a winger as he continues to grow his game.
Especially not on this team. There's not a lot of place for wingers on this team presently.
No,
So
true. And I wonder if that's where they're going with him, is to keep him as a midfielder if he stays at all. Of course, Michael, you mentioned that he could be going to Europe in the offseason. They announced that he and Jaquil Marshall-Rutty are going to Europe to train. So for part of this offseason. So that might happen. But I thought he made really great strides this year. And again, I had it at a C plus because I had him at like a D at the beginning, or maybe even a little into the start of the regular season. But I think you guys have convinced me to change it to a B.
Awesome. That's what we do. All right, let's move on.
Perfect. We'll move on to the forwards. And let's start off with Mr. Young Money, Ayo Akinola. So, Mike, I'll get you to go first.
It's a D minus for me. And the only reason why it's not an F is because he's coming off a serious knee injury. But I mean, I don't really need to explain exactly why we all watched him on the pitch, and there's a reason why Toronto FC are going to go out and improve at striker this year.
Yep. I gave him a D minus as well, and my 3 words are last chance saloon. This is it. Fair or unfair. You know, we can talk about ACL tears. We can talk about the fickle finger of fate. You're a professional footballer who wants to play professionally. This was your mulligan. You know, if you don't come back strong in 2023, and there's no guarantee that he'll be on the roster in 2023 based on 2022's performance, that's it. This is a team with ambition. This is a team with spending power. This is not a team that's prepared to wait for you to figure it out any longer. I think we've given the player more than enough chances. This is it. This is the final one. Your destiny is in your hands. Figure it the F out.
Yeah, I said C minus. I gave him sort of a little bit of a break because of the return from injury, but didn't impress really a ton when he was on the pitch, and
it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking.
It is a little bit, but I think Bob Bradley also mentioned in his comments, I don't know if it was the season-ending press conference or maybe a little bit earlier, about him being able to recover and trust his body after coming back from such a serious injury. And I wonder...
That all makes sense. Makes sense, Mike. But at the end of the day, you want to play football for Toronto FC. You want to be a striker for Toronto FC. You want to be a striker full tilt. You got to score goals, or you got to be involved in goal actions. You can't be a liability out there. And you've been a liability now for more than you've shown promise. Like the scales of justice are tipping, and they don't bode well. You know, the bones on the table don't bode well for Ayo Akinola's future. We have no responsibility to be a safety net at this point. We've given our all for this player. We've put in. It's time now to get return on our investment or move on. It's just that simple, as cold and brutal as that is. I mean, especially with forwards, you gotta have that brutality.
Okay, fair enough. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think next year will be sort of the proving year. If he can do something next year, then you stay, and if it's not, then I could see them moving on. Okay, Achara not coming back next year. I don't have much to say other than F. Irrelevant. He was irrelevant this year for the most part. And
a warm body. Yeah,
it's an F for me.
It's a D plus for me, just because I don't think he was also given much of an opportunity this year, even when the team didn't have much of a roster at the beginning of the season. For whatever reason, he wasn't a Bob Bradley type of player, which is, I actually thought he was closer to the type of player Bob Bradley was looking for than some of the other guys who was getting minutes. So for me, it was D plus. I don't think he was given maybe a bit of 100% a fair shake here with Toronto FC.
I mean, season. I I think he was, because from the beginning, elite headband game. I think that's the reason why I gave him a C minus as opposed to a D. Elite headband game. But I always saw him as a Nick DeLeon kind of player. Like we played him as forward in his first season with the club. He's a natural winger. He can play in midfield. That was advertised on the box. I thought he would get a lot. I mean, he got enough opportunities this year. I thought he would make a real claim for his usability to the squad this season with all the chaos that was going on around. It's an unbelievably missed opportunity from me. And that's why I'm going to stop now, because I'm so disappointed, because I had such high hopes for Achara based on what we saw at the outset, but it's sprinkled to nothing. I don't know what contributed to it, so I'm remiss to slag on the guy, but something went rotten in the state of Denmark, either in the internally or externally, or maybe a combination of both, because no one cratered worse than Achara this year. I think that what we saw on the field was just woeful and unacceptable. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say this. He's going to be, to me, one of those big what ifs. If he doesn't get injured, if the pandemic doesn't happen, what might have been.
Yeah.
But
sure.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Football is littered with tons of players that are like that.
Give me the pre-Pando Achara. Absolutely. This guy, I'm happy he's gone, and it hurts me to say
Yeah, he was never the same after his knee injury. He never recovered the pace, like I said off the top. But also, like, my expectations of Achara would be to be a serviceable role player. Maybe like the 17th, 16th guy on a roster. Not necessarily a guy who comes off the bench every game, but a guy who's capable of coming off the bench every game.
The Tsubasa Endos, the Nick DeLeons, the Nicholas Hasslers. I mean, we don't have those guys. There was an opportunity for him to walk into that position like Jaden Nelson did, and he didn't. And that's on him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair enough. Another player that we might be saying that of potentially in the future, Jordan Perusa. So Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Jordan gets a C for me, but my expectations were never really high for this season for Jordan. Again, a guy who didn't really get too many opportunities with the first team, even when Jimenez and Akinala weren't going. Perusa wasn't called upon, and maybe that speaks to just his level of where he's at currently right now. But a guy who, like I said, who I really didn't have much expectations of. So for me, he gets a C. And what I'll also add, I think he has one of the best mentalities on the team.
You say that often, yeah.
I think he's a good person, a great locker room guy, and a guy who's 100% bought into this club. So hopefully he's one for the future. I think we also have to remember how young some of these players are. So yeah, for me this year, C, he didn't really show much.
Same, gave him a C. He didn't really show much. My ready for prime time was my note. I'm concerned about Perusa. I mean, we know he can play TFC2, at least when they were playing USL League One. We know he's capable of some absolute golazos, but from what we've seen at the MLS level, he looks like a newborn deer out there. So what do we do with him? Because we certainly didn't kick him down to TFC2 for any extended period of time when they had a decent season in MLS Next Pro. Is he on the bubble? Like, is he not good enough for MLS, but too good for MLS Next Pro? If so, what are we going to do with the guy? Right? And
he just might be one of those players that needs to grow into his body a little bit, right? I think when he's playing in MLS, he's not as physically imposing as he is in MLS Next Pro.
I think that's very fair, 100%.
So when you maybe give him a couple of years, and he obviously has the ability to finish. I think he has a little bit more flair than people give him credit for, a little bit more skill than people give him credit for.
Sure thing.
But yeah, you're right. The clock, in my opinion, is starting to tick with Perusa, and I think sooner rather than later, if he wants to be an impactful piece and have a good career, he needs to find a way to earn minutes, first team minutes on Toronto FC, or else it probably has to be elsewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, I said D, and it's mainly down to he just wasn't able to crack an opportunity to be kind of that backup player. Like he had a bit of an opportunity when Iowa was still on the bench at the beginning of the year, or out, sorry, with injury at the beginning of the
Mhm.
year, and try to be sort of that guy who can back up Jimenez, and never really took that opportunity with both hands. And to me, he's a lone candidate. You know, if you can get him somewhere to play senior minutes at a senior level, again, I know a lot of people have said CPL, sure, or if
Sure.
it's at US in the USL Championship, wherever that is, you know,
Regardless, yeah.
I think that could do him a world of good.
He's done that
It's
though.
But
Yeah, he's
but,
done it
Couple
already.
but he's only done it in short period. Like he hasn't done. Has he done a full season? Like I know he went to San Antonio a few times, but those were shorter stints. Those weren't full seasons.
Sure. He also spent time overseas in Italy before signing his
Mhm.
first team contract with TFC. Like he's done the loans in my opinion. He has grown up. It's not necessarily. It's just about playing time. And yeah, maybe that is you. We can have this debate: is CPL better than MLS Next Pro?
Yeah, I mean, that's we don't have time
I
for
don't.
that, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
You know.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't
And
know.
yeah, let's have that debate in the offseason.
it's
Let's
awkward. It's awkward. There's certainly concern, considering the dearth of options, quality options at striker through the stretch that he saw so few minutes. I'll
Very
leave
true.
it at that.
All right, let's run through these ones quickly. We're running a little bit longer than planned, but really enjoying the
My
conversation.
wife is gonna kill me because she wants the office back.
All right, so we'll go with DeAndre Kerr. Mike.
DeAndre Kerr for me, overall C plus. I think when he was on the pitch, he showed a lot of promise, and I think he is one of those guys that will become very useful MLS players. One of those Nick DeLeon, Subasa Endo types that you're kind of referring to, Jeff. I think DeAndre Kerr is probably really close to that. And it was his first professional season, and the fact that he was able to play a role, and I think at this point, for a lot of he's solid. Like you know what you're gonna get. Like the floor is pretty decent with DeAndre Kerr. Now it's just about the ceiling. Like how much higher can he take his game to the next level? And I think this is his first pro season under his belt. He's a big kid. He's got a big stature. And I like a lot of the starting points with DeAndre. And his first year, I believe, was a success in terms of just getting his feet wet and getting minutes under his belt in MLS.
I don't know why I got such a hate on for this kid. I gave him a D. Is it because of the low socks? They just can't stand players wearing low socks.
What about Kosi, man? Kosi's a low sock guy.
I have just about as much love for Kosi Thompson, if we're being honest. I didn't see it, but I trust you guys and I respect your opinions. So I'm going to table mine. I gave him a C, but I see merit in every point you just raised, Mikey. So my verdict is still out on DeAndre Kerr. I thought I just didn't see it. I didn't see the utility. I saw, for lack of a better word, a pylon with no shin guards on the pitch out there. So yeah, I have unjustly got a hate on for this kid, and I don't know why. But,
Fair enough.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I got a C. I think, like as Mike said, I think he's got a great floor. I think you saw a player that clearly was a college player coming into the professional game. But there's two things I really like about him. He has a lightning quick first step. If he can get by you, kind of like Jaden Nelson, like he's gone. His taillights. The second is, look, for a kid to come out of college and get 3 goals in your first season, like that's pretty good.
That ain't bad. Yeah.
It's also he's not also coming out of college. Like he came out of college 2-3 years early, right? He's 19 years old. We also have to remember that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for DeAndre Kerr to be really good, whether it's sort of a tucked in winger coming off the bench or as a forward eventually, as that's more of his natural position. Okay. Jesus Jimenez, Mr. Singh.
I'm going to give Jesus a C plus because the first half of the year he gets an A plus, and the second half of the year he gets a D minus. So somewhere between is a C plus. Obviously when Insigne and Bernadeschi came, for whatever reason, he was not the type of striker that fit in well with both of those players. I think it became very clear that he was not the type of striker that's going to work alongside both of these players. He doesn't move enough off the ball, doesn't
Mhm.
make the runs that you need, doesn't press the way you need. But I also think he still is a good player. So I just not a player for this particular team in this particular system. So considering that he had an amazing start to the year, considering he had a brutal end to the season, I'm going C+.
I gave him a D because it was heartbreaking. I mean, you know, I'd like to think that players have more adaptability and adapt their game around who they're playing with. But just nothing with this guy. Not even an attempt to try and play differently. In fact, almost a staunch refusal to. You're not making a team that doesn't want to play with a natural 10 give you Pozuelo like service once Paz is out the door. So the fact that he stressed for it, or at least appeared to stress for it. Again, I'm not all this comes with a caveat that I'm not privy to the shenanigans, and I think there were some shenanigans. I mean, to not travel with the team on various occasions, that speaks to shenanigans. But yeah, no, just this the promise that we saw at the beginning versus the absolute show that we saw at the end equals D for me. And I, as much as he's a talented striker, I don't want to see him back next year because he'll forever lose the argument between are we playing the style that Berna and Lorenzo want to play or the style that Greg Vanney wanted to play, which you might excel in. It's just not working. So I think the sooner that we cut ties with him and as the better off we are.
Okay, fair enough. I have a C for pretty much the same reasons. Probably a B plus A at the beginning of the season, and then basically by June 15th fell off the face of the earth in terms of goal scoring, and then really became kind of irrelevant even in build-up play at times, which was supposed to be one of his sort of skills. Just
like he was basically the equivalent. He pretty much took his ball and went home, except that it wasn't his ball and he couldn't go home.
I don't know if it was.
I think you're being a little harsh.
Yeah, I think it's a little harsh. I just think he found himself in a position where he had a player that he can really relate to and gave him great service, and then the game kind of switched up on him, and he wasn't able to adapt.
That's fair, tough. But that's that. But I mean, these,
I don't think you can fault his effort. He's just not that type of player that can run relentlessly.
Yeah, and that's kind of what he was asked for.
Yeah,
hey man, let's do all the postmortems we want as long as it's as he's walking away from training.
I will say though, I think he's one of the most talented strikers to ever play for Toronto FC. I do believe that.
Yeah, if we had him in 2015, like Bill Manning is alluding to, I think we would be awesome and totally set up. But this is 2022 TFC that wants to play in a 4-3-3. Yeah, I mean, the longer we agonize over this, I think the more it's to our detriment, right? Like I think all signs point to severing ties. It just is what it is.
Yeah. All right, fair enough. Does anybody not have an A for Federico Bernardeschi?
Nope.
Yeah, I think A is probably fair. I do think his stats were a little bit inflated because of the penalties.
Fair.
But he's still mentality. Obviously, fans love him. You can always appreciate this. You can always appreciate when a guy who doesn't speak English tries to speak English.
I think my three words are.
I feel like
my three words are amazing, well done, and come on. Those are my 3 words.
Yeah. So A's across the board.
Love the guy. Love the guy. I want to adopt him. Like he can live in my house if he wants to. Like basically,
I think his house is much better than.
Yeah. So okay, then can I come live in your house, Federico Bernardeschi? You just want to give him a hug and then go out and drink Peronis with him all night long. So what's not to love? The guy's amazing and one of the best signings we've made in a long time. Just bleeds for the club. What's not honestly, what's not to like? And if someone tells me something not to like, I'm coming to your house to convince you otherwise.
Perfect. Okay, we are in deep added time. So I'm going to give you guys the choice. We had CPL playoffs and MLS playoffs with a good sort of attached question about complementing other Canadian MLS clubs that are in the playoffs. Which one would you rather talk about?
Let's talk about the
What?
compliment clubs.
Yeah, go ahead.
You want to do that?
Yeah, because I think it's, rivalries aside, right? I have a big sports hate can't be real hate. When you're an away fan at Stade Saputo for a 401 Derby or Canadian Classique or Cold Firm, whatever you want to call it, yeah, absolutely. You throw elbows and you do the wanker symbol and you're vocal and loud, etc., etc. But we all support the Canadian men's national team. And there's quite a few players on Montreal, on Club de Foot Montreal, that are like inked in starters for the Canadian men's national team. So yeah, I think, well within reason, like don't go out and buy anthem jackets for, your most hated domestic rival. But certainly they're in the playoffs off the back of some really great coaching and some really great roster building. And I think it's fair to celebrate that within reason, as long as you don't abandon who you are, which is a TFC till you die, right?
Yeah, I'm fighting it a little bit. Like as a Leafs fan, I will never ever root for the Ottawa Senators or the Montreal Canadiens.
Right.
Like the way I grew up, I would never do
but
that.
Canada doesn't. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's fair.
Soccer's a little different though, because you make a very valid point. Like we're all rooting for the Canadian men's national team, and there are some important players on the Canadian men's national team. So would I have an issue with anybody cheering on Montreal if you're a TFC? No, I wouldn't really have an issue because they're a very likable team, and there are guys who we all cheer for, and we're going to be cheering for in a month's time. So in that regard, I won't have issue with it. Would I do it personally? Probably not. Just from a TFC perspective.
It extends to job well done. I'm not going to be doing backflips, but I do appreciate what they've built and the run that they've had. Absolutely.
Yeah. What did Josie say? Forever in our shadow. We got to keep it that way, man.
Yeah. When push comes to shove, screw those guys. But right now we have no push to shove, so you might as well, take a more leisurely view.
I support the Canadian men's national team players on Montreal when they're wearing the Canadian shirt.
That's amazing. All right.
No.
I think that's
you can't. No, I'll leave it at this. No, you can't. No way. Not a possible way. I don't care. Burn out in the first round. And if they go out, you know what's going to happen? They're going to go to a camp and they're going to be able to play with the other MLS players that aren't in camp.
Oh, so cold. I love it.
Beef stays beef. Okay. And that's that. All right. We'll wrap it up for today's show. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode. Toronto Till I Die. We'll be back next week. We're unveiling the WTR end of season awards that Jeff alluded to earlier in the episode. So definitely listen to that. It's like a mix of
some fun surprises.
Of mixing Oscars and raspberries all in one show. We're going to continue our reviews campaign. I know a lot of you guys have started reviewing and liking, so we really appreciate it. If you haven't already, do that on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And subscribe wherever you get your pods. But on behalf of Jeffrey P. Nesker and Michael Singh, I'm Mike Newell. Thanks for listening again. See y'all later. Peace.
Cheers.
And wait. And baby, I'm TFC till I die.